December 19th, 1944. The forests outside Navel, Belgium, were buried beneath a brittle crust of snow, and the air cut like glass. In the cramped turret of a Panther tank, 22-year-old Klaus Wendler struggled with a frozen pencil as he scratched a few lines into his leather-bound notebook. His breath billowed against the steel walls, frost feathering across the optics. He could not see them, but he knew they were there. The Americans had a new hunter. By the time a German turret traversed to meet it, the thing was gone. Yesterday, 3 Tigers had burned within minutes of contact. Wendler wrote one sentence with a trembling hand. "We hear them, but we never see them." Beyond the tree line, men of the U.S. 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion were already in motion, their M18 Hellcats gliding over the frozen ground with a speed that mocked every principle of German armored warfare. For 5 years, the Wehrmacht had believed it possessed the undisputed kings of the battlefield. The Panther with its 75 gun, the Tiger with its thick armor that shrugged off Allied shells. They were machines designed for dominance, heavily armored, methodical, terrifying in presence. Yet in these woods, the pride of German engineering would find itself hunted by something altogether alien to their doctrine. Not heavier, not stronger, but impossibly fast. The Battle of the Bulge was just 4 days old, and already German tankers whispered in disbelief about an American vehicle that seemed to vanish into thin air. Reports spoke of it appearing at one flank, firing, and then reappearing half a kilometer away before a gunner could even acquire a target. The mathematics were merciless. A Panther turret required a full minute to complete one rotation. An M18 could accelerate from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds and sustain 55 on roads. In the time it took a German crew to identify the threat, align their optics, and prepare a shot, the Hellcat had already displaced a mile down the battlefield. For Wendler and his comrades, those 3 minutes were the difference between life and fiery death. In the Ardennes, the last gamble of the Third Reich would collide with a machine that turned speed itself into a weapon. The Hellcat story began not in Europe, but in the factories of Flint, Michigan. In January 1942, as the shock of Pearl Harbor still echoed across America, General Motors received an extraordinary request. The Army wanted a vehicle that could mount a high-velocity 76 gun, maintain a low silhouette, and still reach speeds of 50 miles per hour or more. To seasoned engineers, the demands seemed absurd. Tanks were not supposed to be fast. Armor meant weight, and weight meant survival. But America was willing to gamble on a different vision of warfare, one where agility would outmatch brute strength. The Buick Division took on the challenge, producing what would eventually be designated the M18 Hellcat. Its armor was paper-thin compared to the hulking German machines, just over an inch at its thickest point. A single hit from an 88 shell could punch straight through and often out the other side. Yet this apparent weakness was no accident. Every ton shed from its frame was a second gained in acceleration. Every plate of armor removed was a chance to slip away before the enemy could react. Where German engineers built fortresses on tracks, American designers built hunters. By early 1944, the first units had reached the front. In the Bocage country of Normandy, German crews were stunned by reports of American vehicles darting across fields at unheard-of speeds. One after-action account described enemy machines that seemed to vanish before a sight picture could even be taken. At Arracourt in September 1944, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion used Hellcats to devastating effect. In heavy fog, at ranges so close men could hear the metallic groan of German turrets swinging, a single platoon knocked out 5 Panthers in minutes. The kill ratio was staggering, 39 German tanks destroyed for the loss of just 4 M18s. For German tankers trained to fight deliberate, measured duels, the experience was disorienting. They had been taught that their armor and guns were supreme, that careful positioning and steady fire would always prevail. Now they faced an enemy that refused to play by those rules. The Hellcat's motto, drilled into every crew at Camp Hood in Texas, was simple: speed is life. And in the killing grounds of France and Belgium, that doctrine proved lethal. By the way, if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten chapters of World War II, don't forget to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I always love seeing the global community gather around these stories. The Ardennes Offensive, December 1944. Snow fell thick over the forest roads, muffling the rumble of engines and cloaking the battlefield in fog. For the men of the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion, these conditions were both curse and blessing. The skies were closed to Allied air power, leaving German armor free to advance. But the same mist that blinded P-47 Thunderbolts also leveled the playing field for the Hellcat. In darkness and confusion, its speed and maneuverability became decisive. On December 19th, near the village of Nauville, a platoon under Lieutenant David Hoggins set up an ambush. The men were cold, their vehicles rimmed with frost, but discipline held. Through the white haze emerged the silhouettes of Panthers and Panzer IVs. Hoggins' first Hellcat fired its 76 shell slamming into the side of a German tank. The enemy formation reeled, turrets grinding to find their mark, but the M18s were already shifting positions. Within minutes, 7 German machines lay crippled in the snow. Incredibly, the platoon had lost only one of its own. This was no isolated success. In Bastogne, surrounded and under siege, Hellcats became lifelines for the 101st Airborne. Their ability to move quickly across weak bridges and narrow roads meant they could deliver fire support where Shermans and Pershings could not. On Christmas Day alone, the 75th Battalion destroyed 27 German tanks while losing 6 of their own. Across the entire siege, the battalion recorded a kill ratio of nearly 7-1. German crews were stunned. They had expected the snow and mud to favor their heavier armor. Instead, the very weight of Panthers and Tigers betrayed them, bogging them down in drifts while the lighter M18s skated across terrain with remarkable ease. Worse still, the Americans were not fighting alone. Their supply lines, bolstered by the relentless Red Ball Express, kept fuel and ammunition flowing even in the depths of winter. German tankers, by contrast, often climbed into their machines knowing they had fuel for only a single engagement. For men like Klaus Wendler, those 3 minutes of survival shrank even further in the Ardennes. By the time a Panther could heave its turret toward the flash of an enemy gun, the Hellcat was already gone, reappearing at another flank, striking again with uncanny speed. Behind every battle in Belgium or France stood a larger truth. War was not only fought with guns and armor, but with factories and philosophy. Germany had spent years refining the concept of the super tank. Panthers, Tigers, and eventually the massive Königstiger embodied this obsession, machines with thick armor and formidable guns, but burdened by complexity and weight. Each was a monument to engineering, but also a liability. By late 1944, a single Tiger could take weeks to produce, requiring scarce steel and skilled laborers the Reich could no longer spare. America followed another path. At Buick's Flint plant, production lines rolled steadily, stamping out M18 Hellcats with a speed that matched the vehicle itself. From mid-1943 to late 1944, over 2,000 were built. They were not masterpieces of craftsmanship. Their welds were crude, their armor thin, their interiors Spartan, but they were practical, reliable, and most importantly, replaceable. When an M18 was lost, another could be shipped across the Atlantic within weeks. For German tankers, every destroyed Panther was nearly irreplaceable. For Americans, every Hellcat lost was simply another slot in the production ledger. Doctrinal differences sharpened the contrast. German training emphasized deliberate engagements, hold a position, aim carefully, conserve ammunition. A Panther or Tiger was a fortress, expected to dominate from static defenses. The Hellcat upended this logic. At Camp Hood in Texas, crews learned to fire and move in one fluid rhythm. They drilled to displace within 30 seconds of firing, to communicate by radio with pack-like coordination, and to value mobility above cover. Where German gunners waited for the perfect shot, Hellcat crews relied on rapid flanking and speed to create confusion. This difference was amplified by logistics. America's Red Ball Express kept fuel and ammunition flowing to the front lines even in the worst conditions. By contrast, Germany's armored units often found themselves stalled for lack of gasoline, their tanks silent hulks along the roadside. The irony was bitter. The very machines that symbolized German strength became prisoners of their own weight, while the lightweight Hellcat roamed freely across bridges and backroads the Panthers could never cross. Here lay the essence of the clash. perfection against practicality. Germany built monuments of steel. America built tools for hunters. And on the battlefield, it was the hunters who prevailed. By spring 1945, the Reich was collapsing, yet German crews still dreaded a familiar sound, the high-pitched whine of the Hellcat's radial engine. To them, it meant an enemy already moving, already flanking, already about to vanish into cover before a shot could be returned. Many had entered the war trained to fight in the imposing shadows of Panthers and Tigers. They ended it fighting phantoms that struck from nowhere and disappeared into the mist. The irony was cruel. The greatest tanks of their age undone not by heavier weapons, but by a machine half their weight and twice their speed. For the Americans who manned the M18, the experience was no less harrowing. They knew their armor could not save them. A single hit from an 88 or even a Panzerfaust could reduce their vehicle to burning wreckage. Their defense was motion, their hope was training, their faith rested in the doctrine drilled into them at Camp Hood. Shoot, move, survive. Casualty records tell the cost. Over 200 Hellcats were lost in Europe alone. Yet their crews consistently achieved kill ratios unmatched by any other American armored vehicle of the war. The numbers speak with finality. Across Europe and Italy, M18 battalions destroyed more than 500 enemy armored vehicles. At Arracourt, at Bastogne, at countless unnamed crossroads, they turned the tide of local battles. Their lightweight construction, once dismissed as a flaw, became the very factor that allowed them to race across makeshift bridges, to reposition where no Panther could follow, to outlast German armor bogged down by its own bulk. But perhaps the Hellcat's greatest achievement was psychological. German commanders delayed attacks simply to confirm none were in the area. Entire offensives slowed, momentum lost to fear of a vehicle weighing less than 20 tons. For German crews, survival came down to 3 fleeting minutes, from the first echo of a Hellcat's engine to the moment its shell struck home. Today, a restored Hellcat stands at Fort Moore, its plaque calling it the fastest armored fighting vehicle of World War II. More than a relic, it is a reminder that speed and doctrine can matter as much as steel and firepower. The Hellcat was never the strongest, never the most armored. Yet in the right hands, in the right war, it became unstoppable. For the men inside German turrets in those frozen forests, those 3 minutes were often the last they ever knew.